We are rolling. Good to see you, Jeff. Really good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, this one's going to be something else. This is Angus is coming in lit up and ready to go, and I'm pretty excited too. I would say I struggled with this a little bit because I just couldn't figure out the context for it. This is an odd book that he's written because he doesn't provide. You don't get the holistic context for everything that he does, and he doesn't go through this cycle of like what he does with the lectures where he develops something and then regains it and works out all of the nuances of it. This is just like, okay, so Jesus was born at the time where the Essenes and the Therapeutae were communities that were sort of readying the ground for the spiritual need that was emergent at the time,
Yeah.
and but probably not self-consciously aware that that was the case. Although there were people who were carrying forward this notion that the Logos would incarnate in the flesh. Whoever thinks that's going to happen, right? You know, it's going to happen someday. You know, a whole group of people missed it. Um, um, but I don't mean to be flippant there because that's a great tradition, and you'll be getting into that.
Yeah.
There's much to be inspired by, as there is all of the traditions, and so in this, through the last chapter, it was a very brief chapter, but we see the confluence of the esoteric traditions and initiation processes and mysteries through time, coming into um, a sort of clear stream that is unifying all of them. It's not an eclectic picking. Uh, it's an actual embodiment of this um, teleos that's moving through history agentially, say. And then this chapter is like all of that is as you said so beautifully, and as we prepared for the introduction, all of that is a seed for that which then um, burst forth. And in this chapter, it's post resurrection. We don't even
Yeah.
talk about the resurrection. We don't even talk about the 3 years after the baptism. We are now in early days of Christianity, and it's the aftermath of this event that obviously, like, can you imagine an event like that now, like occurring now, that would change the direction of history, or uh, and really incorporate all of the streams of history. And so here we are. This chapter is the called the Essence of Christianity, and it really explores the husks, I would say, and the institutions that are living as that people are dwelling in as sort of dead aftermath in the shadows of the event, and then the stream that still flows so limpid through,
Yeah.
that as a through line throughout all of history and all of existence, I would say. So that's where we are now. That's a
That's
tall
where we
order.
are now. Thanks for that great introduction, Jeff. So, right at the beginning of this chapter, chapter 11, the essence of Christianity, Steiner brings in this sentence from the Zohar, which I'm going to talk more about in a second. So he just in passing says, as it says in the Jewish occult teaching book of the Zohar, nothing in the world is lost, nothing falls prey to the void, not even the words and the voice of man. Everything has its place and purport. And I, like yourself, we were talking about this, I was struggling to get a real purchase. There was lots of interesting stuff going on here, but it's a nice clear red thread was for the past week and 6 days completely missing. But something happened literally this morning. And it really is, once we begin to unpack what this Sohar or Zohar is, then things really begin to fall into place. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a background there. So the Zohar was something that came into being, depending on who you believe. It's like the 2nd, 3rd century after Christ, or in the 12th, 13th century in northern Spain. and it's secret. It's like occult Jewish teachings that basically seek to are deeply linked with the Kabbalah, which is definitely a more ancient tradition. And what they did is they had this if their purpose is to re-understand the human being's place in the cosmos. And I've made a couple of notes because to help us understand how shockingly similar what this Zohar text is to what we're familiar with within anthroposophy. So he talks about there are three, or the Zohar, the people that are trying to reinterpret, re-understand what the Holy Scriptures are. They talk about understanding that God is this. The word they use is Ein Sof. It's like not created, not being, and it's this completely transcendental reality, which is it's like part of the whole. And you can, if you look at the beginning of Genesis, when you understand it from a Zohar perspective, then you begin to understand that actually that this completely transcendent nature was working together with something that was of an immanent nature. Let's call it earthly nature, but it's it's far broader than that. But sort of something that comes into manifestation. And this is very, very similar to Gnostic thinking that's going on here. So there's I'm not sure if it would be correct to call them Zoharians, but I will do for the context of this conversation. So they're setting up this fundamental tension. There's the completely transcendent, and then there's the immanent and the earthly. And this completely transcendent, not entering into being, is the masculine part, and the immanent is the feminine part. And they have divorced themselves. They've become separated. And the Zohar itself it talks about the necessity of the human being to reconnect these two spheres. They talk about the feminine, or becoming a widow, losing the masculine part, and that they are without the human being, they are incapable of reconciling or finding each other again. So the human being is put in this central role, a little bit very similar to how we find it's presented in humanity. We are the link between the higher and the lower, the transcendent and the immanent, the inner and the outer, the earthly and the heavenly. These are the building blocks of what the Zohar is pulling out of these ancient, like the Torah, the Torah, which was written, now I might be a bit off here, but I think it was about 1,500 years ago. So they're using these ancient documents, and I think this is a really interesting point, because you and I have no problem in saying, "Whoa, that's super interesting," and I don't feel any conflict with the ideas being floated there. But also, we notice that even if we don't, how can I put this? I'll stick with I, and then you can chip in a little bit. But it's traditionally we recognise Judaism as not recognising Christ as the Messiah, the body that or Jesus as being the carrier of the Christ in the event of Golgotha. It's 2,000 years ago. But what we see here is actually evidence of a type of Christianizing of the Kabbalah knowledge, which I find supremely interesting. I'd love to get into conversation with how people who don't recognize Christ, how they see this progression within their own streams, because it is so conciliant with what you and I are familiar with. And so those are a couple of the main things. And then what the Zohar does, so interestingly, it talks about multiple levels of understanding. Again, and the terms are radically different, but when we think about waking consciousness knowledge, imaginative, inspiration, and intuitive knowledge, you can find terms that seem to be coming very close to that within this body of text created all those years ago. So they talk about, for example, how knowledge can be gained through the exterior, which is the pshat in Hebrew, and then you've got knowledge that can be gained through confronting the essence. That was called remez. Knowledge learned through intuition, and then finally knowledge through love, which would be what we would probably call intuition from a anthroposophical perspective. So there's this really, really deep, coherence to this body, which is so similar to key aspects of anthroposophy without the Christ, but still a level of understanding that seems to be approaching ancient mystery knowledge. So really, really interesting. Just wondering if there's anything else. Yeah, so one of the questions for these Zoharians becomes, okay, so what are we doing here on planet Earth? And why do we suffer and why do we exist? And this comes back to the point that I was making before. Is we have to awaken through love of the world. It's at different levels of understanding. This is a way of reuniting the transcendent with the immanent again, and this is philosophy of freedom stuff that's going on there as well. So wondering if there's something else I should mention. Yeah, perhaps, but this is one area where this chapter, so it gives us this type of introduction, but for me this chapter was one of the essential parts is where let's see, I'll just read this little bit as an introduction and then describe the picture around it. So a few paragraphs in, second paragraph in, he says, this logos transforming itself within the many single human personalities has through Christianity been directed away from these to the one unique personality of Jesus. The way I've assimilated this content is, imagine all the stars in the universe, but they're not fireballs. They are reflections of this transcendent that we just talked about. It's the gods, the non-manifest, the transcendent, the masculine. Everything there, all the stars are there. It's as representations, never the whole aspect, just only microcosms, we could use the word. And all of these microcosms, they all form into one body. Okay, and here we've got to move out of the physical realm and into an idea of qualities, the qualities of all these stars. It's coming into one being, and then that one being creating a seed so that every human beings like us here can take part of that seed and then sort of like slowly climb our way back out and rediscover how all of us are connected to every single star, every single quality that is out there in the universe. And people who have moved the idea of what is the Logos, it's like back and forwards in their minds many times, can like feel that essential essence. Like in the beginning was the Word, and this is also deeply Zoharian. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and so all things that came into being were made through Him. Nothing that was made without Him or except through Him. This integrity to the whole being of the cosmos. The cosmos is a cosmic womb which creates the Christ being. That Christ being creates a seed, and then we, by taking hold of that seed, by letting that seed live within us, we naturally will reconnect with the whole universe. That was a little bit about where some of my thoughts went whilst connecting the Zohar and the Logos in there. Thoughts, questions, or shall we? Yeah. What did it spark in your mind?
Wow, that was quite a what do you say? An introduction to everything, to God, man, all existence, and everything. Um, it paints the picture, of the polarity that we all feel in our souls. We all feel bereft. We all feel we don't belong in this universe. That we're existing between the nature of our lives and the nature around us, and this totality of cosmos, that we're somehow completely independent of both, right?
Yeah.
This is what Christianity is the inhabiting of that position between the transcendent, completely unfathomable unity of all existence, that is at once extremely obvious, but absolutely untouchable. There's a reason why traditions would not say the name. And I can't bring myself to say the name. Just like these descriptions, like I don't know what God means, but on the other hand, there's this incredible beauty and wisdom around us that is speaking to us all the time, that is gestural in its mysterious manner, and in its temporality, like the importance of that which is temporal is if we didn't have that temporal aspect to our own soul, then we wouldn't have the vehicle that can mediate between these two impossibilities.
Yeah.
It's just a mystery on both sides. It's all, the mystery is around us, and as soon as so if I didn't have any studied relationship with Steiner's work in anthroposophy or any religious tradition or any of that, then perhaps I could be blissfully ignorant about that and just sort of sit with the strange feeling that human beings are unique, and maybe I'm just a speck in the universe and all of that kind of stuff. But as soon as you start to look at the traditions and see what they were talking about, and that they were they were incarnating out of something, they were distillating out of something, then the story of what it is to be a human being is much more comprehensible. You've watched your children. I'm watching my children distillate out of something that was not separate, and even without ideas of where they came from originally, just to watch their development is extraordinary. They're not primitive. They're not primitive in the sense that we think of primitive, and we touched on this before. That even our best and most enlightened anthropological approaches in Western society are condescending to previous times,
Yeah.
even if they're trying to guard against it, and it's not the right way to look at it. You know,
No.
this is a process of, and we can know this existentially and epistemologically, that this is a process that we're going through of distillation, of individuation, and without I there's a lot of things wrong with America, right? Okay, but
Yeah.
it
And the
embodies
UK.
all, in a sense, it embodies all of the symptoms of this process. So we have an absolute fascination with fame, for example, which is really just personal style and competency brought to uh, an unreal expectation and celebration, right? And so then fame itself becomes a hyper reality that people attain to, right? My daughter and I were talking about this on the way home from school the other day, and she was like, it's so empty, you know, and yet these personalities represent what's possible as a personality uh, um, when developed. So we can't turn back, right? There's
Yeah.
there's the traditions that say we have to get rid of the self, and there's the tradition of natural science that says there is no self, which is a similar kind of denial in a way, you could say. But these are just after effects. This is just entropic momentum from these streams that are centrally alive in our souls, and we don't have to live in the polarity, right? We don't have to live in a Neoplatonic universe or an Aristotelian universe. We have to live in a we get to choose to live in a world that has both immanence and
Yeah.
in it,
Transcendent.
and has the coming into being out of the world of archetypes, or the world of, I hate that word because it's not enough. You know, the world is being, and there are iterations of being all around, and we are that which exists mediating between the two. And the Christ experience, uh, as not so much laid out in this chapter, really this chapter deals with the problems, in a certain sense, of what happened when people became polarized in relationship to these two streams, right? And emblematic of the Platonic and the Aristotelian. The Platonic and Aristotelian streams are emblematic of that
Yeah.
inherent struggle that it is, that our existence is about.
Oh, you've said so much, Jeff. So much interesting stuff. I don't know. I'm going to mention very briefly in passing. It's like a couple of thoughts that you sparked to me, and then come back to the central one, which is time, which you came to, which I think is where we really need to dig into, because it's fundamental, as you rightly identifying. It was interesting. I don't have much time for cultural Marxists, and especially cultural Marxists that try to denigrate the value of the truth in mathematics. Far from it. However, there is a perverse positive side of it, because it is the putting back into doubt. It's like this absolute, mathematics is the only way of really understanding the world. That is incorrect. It's a hugely useful way for understanding the material aspect. So even though I would run a million miles from a cultural Marxist, there's a part of me that can recognize that in them, those people who are advocating that type of thing, there's the seed of a healthy impulse. In my mind, in my opinion, it's taking on a false direction because it's demonizing something which has value. I'm not sure. Hopefully, I'm making sense here. That it's not even cultural Marxism, which when I look at what's happening, it's like in the US and the UK and around the world, it's like to many degrees it abhors me. But there's another part of me that recognizes that it's doing important work. If institutions are going to be reformed, if our way of looking at what life is going to be reformed, this inevitably it's a struggle. It's like when the Darwinists kicked out the creationists, they unfortunately they they poured out the baby with the bathwater there. And the cultural Marxists, they want to do the same here, in my opinion, obviously, of course, here. But ultimately, there's a vein of healthiness in this doubt. I've got to call into question these fundamental assumptions to find out which ones really hold and which ones are social constructs, I think is the word that they would like to use. It's like truth is a social construct. Obviously, I don't adhere to that, but I think it is important that we call into question what is reality and what a lot of people consider to be a truth. To what extent, in what fields, in what realms is it a truth? That is of huge value. Now I get a chance to mention one of my favourite films for when I was young. One of my favourite films for a long time, my single favourite film for a long time was, and then I had to add a few more because I saw loads of other good films, was a film with Michelle Pfeiffer and John Malkovich called Dangerous Liaisons. Amazing film, and I happened to rewatch it again a couple of days ago for the first time in many years, and there's this beautiful poignant phrase in there where these schemers they're coming to the realization, and one of them says, vanity and happiness cannot coexist. I was thinking about your daughter's conversation. There's this being drawn to stardom and seeking happiness outside us. Once we become completely dependent on that, then it's like our own well-being, our own happiness is ultimately going to pay the price. Anyway, that was a little, by the way, Dangerous Liaisons, cracking good film. But coming back to time, because I think this is an essential hidden ingredient in this chapter here. I think this is why the idea of a seed is so useful here, because a seed that's exactly what it needs to reveal its full nature, its full being. A seed doesn't seed and then oak tree. No. You need decades and centuries before you begin to really comprehend or can see what was all latent in that acorn comes into being, and you can't accelerate it. If you do accelerate it like they do, like in greenhouses or something like that, you often get a weakened form of the actual the plant itself. So time is absolutely of the essence. And now, I mean, human beings, we're a little bit biased in our thinking. We commonly believe we only have one lifetime, and that therefore all of this progress, all of this revelation should happen within the span of a lifetime, so that I end up in heaven and I'm happy. But here, and we touched on this in the Apocalypse as well when we looked at that we begin to, it's possible to develop a completely different relationship to time, and this is why reincarnation and karma is such an essential idea, that we can't even, it would be so immensely arrogant and conceited of us to believe that's in one single lifetime we could imbibe that seed, take that seed into us, and to unite us with the whole of the Logos, the Creator. It's like this reunification between the immanent and the transcendent. Yeah. So I remember sitting at university. This is one of these strange thoughts you have. I can still see myself sitting in this university. It would have been probably 1993 or 1994, so pre me knowing anything about Steiner, I believe. And I remember, because I was reading sort of like New Agey stuff, and I remember thinking, gosh, if I had infinite patience, there would I wouldn't suffer type of thing. Do you know what I mean? It's this idea that's like this rushing to do things. It's like is creating a type of a tension in us, and that's not to say tension is inherently bad, but it's like if we don't understand how we are, this tension that we create in ourselves, like it creates like angst about what is, or a lack of fulfillment, or how that desire to speed up time that expresses itself in our souls. Yeah. So, time. One final bit. That. Do you remember the time when we were doing that work with Sophia and Jonathan, when we were looking at the being of Anthroposophia, and it's like her, it's like one of our 7-year periods is a period of 700 years for her. It's like she develops, it's like moves to the next phase of development, like every 700 years. And we looked at that concept. And that's one of the lenses, I believe, that can help us also to understand. So when he's talking about this essence of Christianity, when he talks about Clement of Alexandria, the heretics, Augustine, these type of things, these and we could then go into like the medieval period, which he doesn't do here. We can begin to see how there is definitely humanity is taking huge leaps forward in those phases, but according to our, if we're not infinitely patient, it feels like it's going too slow.
Yeah, I think of time as in chronos, and time as in timing, as in kairos,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then place matters too, the time and place.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a time and place where an event occurred that was an evolutionary event. It's not a religious belief. All talk about pre-axial age and post-axial age, those are interesting markers of time.
Absolutely, yeah.
But they don't speak anything of timing. They don't speak anything of the kairos. And is it possible to read the kairos just like you read a clock? And I'm suggesting that tension that you're talking about is what we really call intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
That we change the world and are changed by the world as individual personalities. If we don't develop an individual personality, if we don't, if our independent soul isn't the vessel for a developing personality, then there's no possibility of participating in the intentionality of what it is to be a human being. And as such, because of the evolutionary event that occurred, that that intentionality is the seed that you're talking about. It's where potentiality exists. It's where it's possible to inform that intentionality as a consciously motivated purpose that grows in its clarity as relates to both the transcendent and the immanent, and that we have a foot in both worlds. It turns out.
Can you unpick the Chronos Kairos one? It's not. It's a distinction I'm not aware of. So there might be our listeners might not be aware either.
Yeah. So Chronos is that kind of time that we measure, right? The sort of the very useful. I understand. Is it Switzerland where everything is on time always? And that the clock was invented, and that just to whatever extent, no matter where it is, that relationship with time is one that that in part creates the inner tension that you're talking about, because we think that time runs in a linear way, so that time is measurable, right? It's the atomic clock, right? But it's in reference to something, right? And Kairos is the timing of things. Like, it feels like it feels like the timing is right for something to come to fruition.
Okay, so like it's got a quality instead of just measurability.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and you and I have like, not just you and I, but we as persons have a sense of timing, like sense of the rhythms of our life, and when and Waldorf education is a good example of this, because there are things you do in phases, and you don't jump ahead. You go through the whole phase, and then when the time is right, and it depends on the individual personality largely, though there are also lawful rhythmic continuities, and it's very much dependent on the personality, how you feed that, so that the seed comes to complete fruition, and then drops another seed, and we're back into intentionality and that tension. And when you can hold the sense of timing in your own life, but also in historical evolution of God, man, and everything, as you were putting it, then you're allowing for a participation in that process. That's what I wanted to say about time, and that the time of the evolutionary time that incarnated as a person. One could say that all of time, that time is in a sense, is that transcendent unity that you're talking about. It's an aspect of that transcendent unity, and it's self-distillated as an individual human being that could mediate between the body that being was inhabiting, and the body of the earth, and the cosmos out of which it distilled. And that's the process of what it is to be a human being evolutionarily over time. That's our process. It's just that one person did it in a way that we can be self-aware about.
Yeah. So this whole time thing is becoming a lot richer in the context of this, and how you did in the context of the chapter, but also in essence that somewhat simplistically, it's like Ahriman is associated time-wise with trying to bring to humanity what belongs really to the future. So it's trying to bring the future to humanity too quickly, and Lucifer is this opposite force that is it's retrograde, trying to adhere to old things that are no longer of the time. And we continually live in this tension in our souls between living in a way that is in harmony with the quality of time that we are living in, and it's a really potent idea. And then in Waldorf education, it would be expressed, for example, in the idea that in these 7 to 14-year-old time spans, so there's a lot of focus that's put on memory, the strengthening of the inner, the feeling life. It's like emotional connection to story and this type of thing, and specifically to myth, because that will create a solid foundation for that being as she continues through life. And if I bring in the intellect too quickly there, then what I'm doing is I'm actually undermining, it's like a solid, healthy feeling life. And that being, unless it sort of like sees what what was lacking in the education system and takes its own remedies, will be, it's like, encumbered by that lack of a strong inner emotional life that helps them navigate through, like, all the difficulties of life. So yeah, it's really, I really like that you brought that in, that the quality of time aspect.
I like that you brought in the soulful aspect of the feeling life too, because here again, I've been working, as you know, with Witzenmann,
Yeah.
and the real, what really comes out of his structural phenomenology is metamorphosis as the archetype for everything. Really, basically, like it's a process, and it's a metabolizing, and it has its own laws. It turns out, if you
Yeah.
put it under a fourfold microscope, which is his basic idea, is that there are four concepts underlying all structure, all organic structure, and that organic structure is microcosmic in relationship, and informic, and inter what do you say, reciprocal determination. All existence is in reciprocal determination, and it's moving in a direction metamorphically, and what it's working with is polarities, right? That's the way in which it accomplishes the evolution is through metamorphosis. And I prefer the word metamorphosis. I mean, it's sort of redundant then to say evolution. And it's also connotative of a particular belief system that's in the religion of natural science, determined as the big history narrative, right? And which would preclude all of this conversation about timing and the agential in the cosmos, and the relational aspect of the agential in the cosmos, and us as agents who are mediating between the temporal and the eternal, say,
Yeah.
right? With a temporal aspect that we are eternalizing, right? And so going back to metamorphosis, that when what you're talking about is a mastering of sympathy and antipathy, right? The mastering of what is the Luciferic and what is the Aramonic in the soul, as
Holding it in
being,
balance. Yeah.
in being, and yes, and we will conform to the reality that we perceive reality to be, and if we allow one or the other to take over, we will close down into a one-sidedness, and that seed will not germinate.
Yeah.
There will be no seed, right? It will stop there. Then we become ideological, we become doctrinal, we don't do anything that allows for the further embodiment of the spiritual into the physical body, right? And then this is the picture that's not really talked about in this chapter, so I don't want to go into that, and I'm sure we'll get into it.
Indirectly, I think we can connect it to what you're saying, in my mind too. One of the questions we talked about, or I flagged for you as perhaps interesting to look at, is this word heretic. That I think it's. I mean, it comes from. I won't try to pretend I know much Greek here, but I think it comes from the verb heri something, which means to choose. So a heretic is somebody who chooses, and I think there's a strong link to, it's like there's a modern day understanding of a heretic, and then there's the heretic of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century, which is a completely different understanding of what a heretic is. So the quality of time at that time, heresy was like an integral part of Christianity. Choosing your own path was an integral part of like growing that Christ seed in you. What about yourself? What do you think? What are some of your thoughts around this word heresy or heretic? What do you think they are? These heretics.
Yes, I would. My thoughts around it are really how people are. There, that it's the what we'd call today in grouping and out grouping, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it was a powerful impulse that was happening, right? And there was no going around it, right? The Christianity was going to develop, right? And it was going to develop in a very temporal and human way, and that there were people who thought they had figured out the path, right? And that it had something to do with the hierarchy of initiates, and that we were just going to place, right? Because as we've talked about before, only a very few people were could be initiates, could have the soul readiness to be initiates into the mysteries. Otherwise, you're blown apart. They would be blown apart, and they expressed the fear and all of that, and the terror of facing the initiation process.
Yeah.
Right. And we talked about the four rabbis and the ways in which you can be torn apart. And so what's happening is that people wanted to preserve this history, this because they there's no denying that this Christ impulse is alive, and so it must be clothed in the mysteries. Say is one stream, right? And if it's not clothed in the ancient mysteries, which that then how do we relate to this overwhelmingly powerful, unexplainable influence that's happening to us now? I'm a contemporary of the early Christians now in my persona. Like, how do I reconcile this? And so obviously the church evolved in a very authoritarian hierarchical structure, and that was the beginning of what the in and out grouping that was occurring because of the powerful call to unify the polarities. Because you could comfortably be in your own polarity, right? In a as a say tradition where there were no individuals. Everybody was an iteration of a sort of single identity personality, right? But once individuation occurred to the degree to which personality became the mediating factor in the religious experience, then your personality just won't do, son. It's my personality that matters, and so this sets up this kind of institutional egotism, something like that, right? And it's inevitable. It was inevitable. It had to, in a sense, had to happen. It's terrible, and it didn't have to happen the way it did, right? We didn't have to have the Crusades, right? We didn't have to have religious persecution, people burned at the stake. We didn't have to have witches in Salem, Massachusetts, witch hunts and such. We didn't have to have that. Like, we didn't have to have World War I or World War II, right? I mean, in a sense, we had to have conflicts, right? In a sense, we had to go through the inner conflict and resolution that then at this moment is birthed the notion, I would say, of heretic.
Yeah. Interesting thoughts. You're sparking off just like a couple of things there. I think one of the things that I think the medieval church. So in this chapter, he talks about Augustine. So like saying, I can only believe in Christ because of the authority of the Catholic Church. And this is sort of like, this is fundamentally different to a very sort of like, it's like pick and mix, so like of Christianity, which was like fully acceptable, so like for the first 3-4 centuries of after the Mystery of Golgotha. And I think one of the aspects that I think is interesting to to consider, which I'm afterwards going to link to actually a contemporary issue in anthroposophy itself. One of the things that's like really annoys people, like about the church, is like all this this idea of sin and purification and this type of thing, especially if you're like not part of the church. It's anti-pleasure, it's anti-humane, it's like the authority, is the church like imposing their authority on human beings? No, just let them go for pleasure. If anybody's watched the film or read the book, A Portrait of Dorian Gray, then you can see what dedication to pleasure does, or one understanding what it means. But so the church, one way of understanding its important role, it's like in the preparation of the human soul for it's like a further development of the Christ within it, was exactly this, like this shedding, this slow purification of the astral body, which is an essential part of any movement forward on a spiritual path. If you read Knowledge of Higher Worlds, then it's like 3 steps: moral progression, 1 step towards clairvoyance. This is, I think, this is one of these aspects coming in. So like they seem to be clamping down, using one term, so like heresy, like clamping down, so like saying we've got the truth. But there is a healthy impulse behind that, because humanity has to prepare itself for the second coming, or the coming, the parousia, the coming of the Christ has always been there in the etheric, but humanity has to grow up. It has to come out of its purely immanent and to begin to meet the transcendent. So I think this is one of these fundamental tensions that we can find in history, is that these huge cultural things going on, like with the church being the dominant power. Here we're talking, obviously, it's Europe specifically, but it's having this vice-like grip over culture in Europe for over 1,000 years. It's clearly something big is going on there, and I think looking at a slow purifying of the astral body is an interesting lens to look at it through. And the Crusades, I think, are also very interesting. Since you brought them up, because they are in one way, so obviously not condoning the Crusades, but what is a benevolent interpretation of what was going on there, despite all the hideousness. And remember, I talked about this in the same context with cultural Marxism beforehand. But what is one way of understanding? Humanity had recognized it had lost the essence. If you look at Europe in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th century, they felt how Christianity, the church, it didn't represent Christian values anymore. A bit of a deja vu, really, isn't it? And so something needs to be done. And no doubt there was power and money involved in all the in everything that was going on there. But also there was a soul desire to reconnect with this impulse. And if you look at what happened with St. Francis of Assisi and Thomas Aquinas and these people in the 1200s, one way of interpreting this is a fruit. It's like a reinvention. It's like a trying to move this project further. It's of a purification of the church. And obviously there was a lot left to be desire on that phrase, but on that from that perspective. But it was still an improvement. It's reinvigorated this Christ seed that had been planted in earth. And how am I relating that to today? I think it's really interesting when you look at, we've talked about spiritual bypassing, It's like in non-anthroposophical circles. In anthroposophical circles, you get people like Are Tourist on, like, popping up. Very interesting guy. But if I have read him closely enough, and if I'm wrong on this, I'd love somebody to point me out. It's like where I can read more about it. But there is a complete focus on gaining clairvoyant vision and nothing about a moral purification. It's like the responsibility we have is like this side of the threshold to clean up. It's like what is living in our astral bodies. So these impulses, they keep coming back, but they are central to any making any like progress forward on this reconciliation of the transcendent and the immanent, finding our place, like as that which is open to above and that which is open to below. And this is an essential part of the second half of the philosophy of freedom. That's what it's trying to get us to see, getting us to realize our place, like as this focal point, that which can reconcile God. And this is also something the Zoharians, they talk about. It's like, and this sounds heretical to the average Christian, I imagine, but they would be happy saying, the Zoharians, God needs us, because God is like split apart and is no longer able to find the other half that it's lost, only through human beings. It's like being this marriage counselor.
Well, being an alchemical reaction,
Yeah.
a reagent is the human personality. It's the reagent that is the alchemical process that is metamorphosis of the two polarities, and they're the ultimate polarities, right? I mean, they're the polarities of they're archetypal polarities for all the polarities that then fall out that we get to work with. Like, this is a hell of a privilege, right? And the Christ is central to this because it is, let's say, the universe going, casting itself out so that it can reunite itself in a certain sense, right? In human beings, and evolutionarily speaking, that human being affects the etheric realm of the life forming, the fourfold life forming aspect of the etheric is embodied as a fourfold body of the Christ, and so we're I get what you're saying, that we need to purify our astral body, and in other words, we need to come to a cognitive relational polarity relationship with sympathy and antipathy, say, and we're not talking about purification in the sort of Nazian sense of the word, but we're talking about making these muddied waters run clean and clear, and
Not being slave to unconscious impulses.
right, but also understanding that those unconscious impulses are what we need to grow into, not bring up and do shadow work with, right? Those are shadows. Shadows pale in light. So what we're doing with the seed is providing light. We're providing water. We're providing that which the four ethers in anthroposophical language, the etheric world is built structurally, surprisingly, out of a fourfold concepts, and those concepts aren't abstractions. They're windows into the formological reality that is the etheric, and we're looking to incarnate into that so that we can spiritualize the physical. So it's not just purifying the astral. It's not just like an ascension to the etheric. It's at the same time it's a descension into toward the physical body, and the soul is the vehicle that is the permeating factor that's independent of both. And we've talked about this before, but within the light of uh, within the light of, we haven't talked about it in Christian terms before. We haven't talked about it we've talked about it epistemologically. We've talked about it as child development. But this is the nature of things that we get to be involved with, and it's potent, and it's full of potential, and it's full of clear intentionality. And without the clear intentionality, we don't have freedom, and we don't have freedom if we mistake freedom for choice, because we don't have a choice in this matter as relates to freedom. It is the human responsibility to gain freedom, to gain autonomy. You can choose not to, right? But if you choose not to, then you're following a one-sided path. You're going to succumb to this astrality that's impure, and you're going to fall into a one-sidedness. And what is my friend Roger used to say, God rest his soul, that evil in one time is good in another time, so to speak. That evil, what evil is action out of time, out of kairos, out of the right timing for things, right? That's what evil is. And we do low-grade evil to children every day in our public school systems, because we're not readying their astral body to be grabbed hold of, their feeling life to be turned into cognitive sensory perception. They're taught that their feelings are something that are precious or should be disregarded, both of those polarities, as trivial or as the only thing you have. Like, it's either extreme preciousness that we describe in these polarities of feeling, or it's complete dismissal as trivial. And it's the material that we're working with. Why would we do that?
One of the questions you asked me was about like the relationship to institutions and knowledge, and I think also that question of yours like fits in really interesting into this, looking at through a chronological chirical, if you could say that, lens. That if we do look back, so like through, we can see it's like an immense, it's like growth in understanding in a certain way. So clearly, so like new impulses have come in, and institutions have been created around that. You've got the I'm digging quite a bit, or continue to dig quite a bit into like the 13th, 14th century and what's going on there with scholasticism and nominalism, and then so like to confront like the Enlightenment like 200-300 years later as like a natural outgrowth of this it's like hugely methodical but completely based in logic and having seemingly little to do with the real world. How this was a preparation of the human soul to then be able to apply that type of structured logical thinking to the world that was becoming to them more immediate with the senses, and this fundamental stronger desire to really study the world as a manifestation. And for them it was still, it's like the many of the early scientists, I would be surprised if it's not like nearly all, they were working from the perspective that the world is interesting because it's a manifestation of God, and that by studying the world I am gaining knowledge of God. Not comprehension in the sense of like I understand it's like the whole of God, because that's impossible. Comprehension is impossible, but knowledge of God for the early scientists, that was their purpose. Let's discover the richness of the world. But like all institutions, the impulse, the healthy impulse that they had is carried into a quality of, into like a new era of time, when that quality is now, instead of being something that is full of life forces and so like carries forwards like towards a healthy development, actually becomes luciferic in the sense that it's like it ties people to the past and actually hinders them from going on. And so you get this luciferic aromatic backwards and forwards as certain groups of populations try to like pull out of these luciferic grips, trying to hold people back in conservative materialistic thinking, and then it'll and in other people it goes too hard the other way. So it's like the whole idea, it's like skepticism, or it's like it's one of these interesting manifestations like this. There is no truth. It's just something we've invented. It has nothing to do with the outside world and this thing unseen. So like we can never know the real world. These hugely skeptical positions with regards to knowledge, they then have to be overcome, like in this backwards and forwards between these polarities. And as human beings, we are stuck in the middle, and the more we are towards the extremities of these polarities, it's like the more painful it is for us to deal with other people that are there. It's like in the other polarity, whereas if we're in the middle, it becomes easier to understand this person's perspective and the other person's perspective as well. So I say, there are elements of truth or elements of value to what the other side are trying to achieve, and this is, for me, this is one of the fruits of like what Christ brings to us, this ability to recognize that there is nothing that is inherently evil. There will be a seed of something healthy in that, even though it might be hidden under like a lot of layers of manure. There is something healthy that wants to come out, something that us human beings need to help us grow into. It's like a larger perspective of what life is.
Yeah, that question is really born out of also looking at doing a little bit more research into Zarathustra and Zoroastrianism and its role, historically, and it's speaking of fantastical things. Steiner describes Zarathustra as lending his astral body to Hermes and his etheric body to Moses. So that's something to meditate on, as it is. But this is the wisdom that tradition, and its ties also to the rise of Islam and Mohammedanism, and the way in which Aristotle was fully taken up in a way that the West never did. The West
until Aquinas,
right, in a religious context, whereas in Islamic context, in the Islamic culture of Gandhi Shapur, it was in a scientific context that Aristotle was taken up, and so that's all interesting because it's all coming out of the mystery traditions. Science is born out of the mystery tradition. Let's be clear about that. It's not. It didn't just drop out of the sky as an enlightened moment. It was a symptom of the momentum of a kind of a religious impulse, which is why we see scientism today, and why the new heretics questioned the COVID narrative, right, and became heretics, right,
exactly,
in the sense that you're describing, right, in the sense that Tycho Brahe was, and
Galileo,
in the way in which Plato was threatened in that respect, and Aristotle was threatened in that respect. But the question comes out of the irony of this, right? To me, like on one hand, I totally get what you're saying, and the Christ is the mediating factor in the divide, right? And and is the comprehensive and is the immanent. It had became immanent. It's God
Mm.
become had. It's the God becoming immanent as individuality. Um, but but the irony there is that was a unifying force, right? It was unifying the sort of the stream represented by Buddhism and the stream represented by Zarathustrianism. The stream represented by the Platonic and the Aristotelian, um, uh, unified, right? And this is Steiner's work, as I see it. The philosophy of
Hmm.
freedom is the unification of the Platonic and the Aristotelian, right? It's the unification of Plato and Aristotle, in a certain sense, from
Yeah.
that stream, from the philosophical stream. And in this chapter, he really uh, details the way in which Neoplatonism within the church kind of screwed things up, right?
Hmm.
Because it's a one-sided view, right?
Yeah.
But um, but he doesn't say it screwed it up. He just lays it out there, like institutionally, this is the way it went, right?
Yeah.
Is the right? So the irony that there was this event that was a unifying factor, and then it accelerated the polarity, accelerated the divide institutionally into the way the church formed and the way that natural science then formed,
Hmm.
right? And then here we are, right? Here we are. And so I guess what that makes is the opportunity to see the mediating factor that much more clearly,
Yeah.
right? Except that the church is, if you're growing up in the church, then you that mediating factor is stained and can never rise to the occasion. And 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 if it's the Catholic Church, then you need a bunch of mediating people who represent the Christ as the mediating factor, as opposed to a real relationship with a phenomenological reality that the Christ lives in every
Yeah.
etheric body. And then on the other hand, you have um, um, the the Church of Natural Science, which says that the self is a at best an epiphenomena, and we can deal with it phenomenologically, right? Because we have to, at best, right? Or it's just a biochemical outgassing. We've been through this, right? We've been through this dance, but but this is the time. This is the time now that we come to terms with the deep mystery that is before us, that is represented in the middle between the polarities.
Yeah. And certainly, I mean, both you and I feel it's like there is there's this crescendo building. How much longer it will continue building, but and this is where I mean, right, the deeper reading that we've done thanks to reading this book uh, of the apocalypse has like been so interesting to find out and to hear it described in terms of it's a prophecy, and you can begin if you work thoroughly with it to identify where you are, and just knowing where you are in a story. And it might be that things are worse, that worse things are to come, but these are global, these are universal events. And it's like, yeah, you have to find your way through them. You have to ride the wave. Um, but if you don't think, for if your eye is a fiction, or if life has no meaning, and you see everything going to pot, then desperation and sadness are really the only natural human reactions, and they are fully understandable. But this is what religious thought allows people, or spiritual thought allows people, because you're connecting to greater the greater narrative that's going on um, in life.
Yeah, you're participating in it.
Yeah.
The key there is, and I find that there's a lot of understanding of growing understanding um, in our in this space say, of the idea of participation. That it's possible to be a participant in cosmic and immanent processes, and that it's not only is it possible, but that's what we're doing.
We're doing our best, trying to
Yes,
be
by
actors
build-
in there.
Yeah, and we that's what our personalities are here for, is to bring it home.
Help the transcendent and the immanent find each other again. We're marriage counsellors.
Yes, indeed. Yes, where concepts are real, and
Yeah.
we can tell that we can tell what's unifying.
Is it time for where's my finger? Time for that one. Yeah. Okay, there she goes.